Thanks, Tim. So I'm going to do 4 in a row here and power through straight in a row here. So the first one I wanted to touch on is a pretty common one. We've done this one twice before, actually, which is the demand for submarine cable capacity is doubling every 2 years. We did this in our original one. We did it in the one after it. So 2 in a row, I thought, probably hasn't changed, right? Well, let's consider, has it changed? It's been a while. It's been 9 years since we did it last. Quick math lesson for everybody. What does doubling every 2 years mean in terms of an annual growth rate? 41%, right? That's the red line we have here. That's the threshold for doubling every 2 years. So the chart I have here, I've laid out some major submarine cable routes, transatlantic, transpacific. Hope you can see them all up here. Intra-Asia, Europe, Asia, Africa, Europe, Europe to Middle East, with 3 different 5-year periods of the compound annual growth rate for us to look at this and see what's been happening. So the first period, we're above that doubling every 2 years threshold. For all these routes, the Atlantic was just a bit below, but then the next 5-year period here, 2015 to 2019, we can see it's still above, getting a little low there in the Pacific, Europe to Middle East, but it's still growing at a pretty rapid clip in all of these areas. Now, what's changed from 2020 to 2024? We have this. It's gone below the line. Everybody kind of awed, like, ooh, it's not that bad, okay? It's not that bad. Remember, this is doubling every 2 years, that threshold, but 26% per year, or these all bars are above 26%, that's doubling every 3 years. So it's not that bad, okay? But it is below the doubling every 2 years threshold, according to our data. But I wanted to go a bit beyond just our data and look at other sources to see what else is happening in different parts of the industry. So first, I found this chart from Ericsson showing mobile network data growth. This is from, I think, about 2020 to 2024, and it's hard to see, I know, but here's their line for the doubling every 2 years threshold. So you can see about 2021, that black line there, it dipped below the 41% threshold. But mobile traffic, as we all know, that is not an exact proxy for subsea cable capacity, but still a useful thing to bear in mind of what's happening on the access networks. Let's also look at what's happening in broadband networks, okay? So here's data that I found from a company called OpenVault, and they're showing here the year-on-year growth for the average broadband usage. And interestingly, you can see here this big spike in Q1 of 2020. What happened then? That's the COVID spike, okay? Everybody's working at home, broadband traffic soared, it was way up. Then, subsequently, it's gone way down. In the most recent period, I think it's 9.5% annual growth in the last period. What else do we have? Let's look at maybe some company-specific data here. So I found that AT&T themselves, they cited a figure of 30% annual growth from 2020 to 2023. They don't state what part of the network the growth is on, but it's interesting to see that they've cited that figure. They are not themselves equal to subsea capacity, but still, one more metric that shows slowing growth. Cogent, the big internet backbone operator, in their earnings call just last month, they indicated that their network traffic was flat sequentially for the quarter, but it increased only 8% year over year. So another metric here showing that the growth has been slowing. Let's go beyond carriers. Let's look at CDNs, the content delivery networks, and see what we have there. So late last year, Akamai released their earnings report, and in it, they had this pretty interesting statement. In terms of traffic growth, it is growing very slowly at rates we haven't seen in the 25-plus years we've been in this business. So it's growing very, very slow. Now, they don't define what very, very slow is, but we can assume it's probably less than doubling every 2 years, I would think, right? But again, even though they are a user of subsea capacity, they themselves aren't an exact proxy for submarine cable capacity demand growth, but still, one more example of slowing growth. Let's go to maybe a useful company metric for this industry especially. Have you heard of Meta? So Meta released this in a presentation at their At Scale conference last fall, talking about the impact of AI on their network, and a pretty interesting chart. They gave a number here saying total backbone grew 30 or more than 30% year on year, which is below that 41% threshold, not subsea specific. We don't know what the greater than symbol means here, but I would hope if it was more than 40%, they would have just said more than 40%. So let's assume it's 30 to 40% for Meta on their backbone, but again, we don't know what part of the network that was referring to exactly. One more company that you guys might have heard of. You heard of Google? So in April, they released this bit about their WAN bandwidth. Now, I'm not sure what portion of their overall capacity is accounted for in their assessment of what their WAN bandwidth is, but they did state over the last 5 years, there's been a 7-fold increase. If you convert that into a compound annual growth rate, that is about 48%. That's above the doubling every 2 years threshold, so that's kind of interesting. But again, it's not subsea specific. It could heavily be within the US or with Europe. It's within Europe. It's not very clear. So with all these examples in mind of how capacity has been slowing, let's look at why it's been slowing, actually, okay? So the reasons that we've heard from many operators and networks around the world are a few things. And the chief one is there's been a continued effort to localize content, applications, and compute. I pulled this additional slide from Meta's talk last fall from the AtScale conference. That was really interesting because they have this term they call bending the demand curve, which I think is a great way to think about this, is they've been engaging in efforts to improve the placement of content and to optimize their network so that it's more efficient. So this chart here you can see on the right, the orange is what it would have been without engaging in these efficiency measures, and the blue is how they've been able to bend that curve down to make it more efficient. So demand is not slowing, it's still growing, but it's not growing as fast as it would have been, so don't freak out, demand is still growing. One other issue we hear about also is the impact of submarine cable delays. So many operators have told us, yeah, they would have grown more if only they had had the cables that they have paid for in service to deploy what they want to deploy. So we could see some more rapid growth for some years when new higher capacity cables come into service, hopefully in the next couple of years. And finally, one factor that really impacts cloud providers or companies who are new to the market, often when they enter a market, they're adding 3-4 paths of 400, 800, 1.6 terabits each to be able to meet the uncertain demand they're going to have in that market. So you get this huge surge. But then once they have that in place, the growth rates tend to slow on an annual basis. So you see a bit of a deceleration. And so that happens a lot in developing markets where these companies have been expanding their cloud regions into. So let's conclude this myth. The myth of the demand for submarine cable capacity is doubling every 2 years. From what we've shown, I think it's clear that the demand appears to have slowed, and it's less than 41% annually now. So this was confirmed the last 2 times we did it, but we're going to change it. This myth is now busted. It is not doubling every 2 years anymore.